The train slowed as it climbed the last stretch of mountain. There was no station, just a small clearing between pine trees, wrapped in morning mist. Kai stepped off alone, carrying nothing but a single duffel bag and questions he couldn't name. He wasn't here for answers. He didn't even know what the right questions were anymore. All he knew was that something in his life had unraveled. Not loudly, not suddenly, just quietly come undone. In the city, Kai had achieved everything. Job, reputation, comfort. But still, something tightened in his chest each night. A sense that none of it really belonged to him, that he had become the caretaker of a life he didn't choose. So he came here, to the mountain, to silence, to the monastery whispered about in online forums. A place where people didn't come to escape, but to remember. As he walked the winding trail toward the temple gates, the forest didn't speak, but it listened. Every crunch of his steps felt heard, and in that quiet, something deep inside him whispered, "Some things must be let go." The monastery wasn't what Kai expected. No incense, no chants, no robed monks greeting him with solemn wisdom, just an old wooden gate slightly crooked and a courtyard swept clean by wind and time. A young novice nodded and pointed him toward a simple room, bare floor, a thin mat, and a window with no glass, only space. Kai dropped his bag, sat on the mat, and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. Hours passed. No one came. No guidance, no ritual. Just stillness and the sound of pine trees breathing in the wind. He tried to meditate, to think, to journal, but everything felt like an effort, like trying to catch water in clenched fists. His phone, off for the first time in years, stayed untouched. The urge to reach for it buzzed louder than any ringtone, but he didn't. Instead, he sat in the silence, and slowly the silence began to speak, not in words, but in weight, in questions he couldn't escape anymore. Why am I here? What am I really holding on to? By the second night, Kai felt the silence clawing at him. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loud, accusing. The walls of the room felt too close, the questions too sharp. He found himself pacing the courtyard under a pale moon, heart restless, breath shallow. Memories began to surface, not dramatic, just persistent. A lost friendship, a failed relationship, the father he never said goodbye to. These were the things he had packed away neatly in the back of his mind, wrapped in busyness and productivity. But here, with no distractions, they returned, raw and uninvited. He gripped a stone from the ground and held it in his fist like an anchor. Tight, silent, heavy. And in that moment, he understood. It wasn't the world that burdened him. It was what he refused to release. If you've ever held on to something so tightly it started holding you back, subscribe and ring the bell. Sometimes, one quiet story is all it takes to loosen the grip. The next morning, Kai was sitting beneath a tree, the stone still in his palm. He hadn't slept. His body was in the monastery, but his mind was pacing cities he had left behind. That's when the monk appeared, not from a grand entrance, but from nowhere. He was old, cloaked in simple robes, his face lined with time, not worry. He didn't speak. He simply sat across from Kai, mirroring his posture. For a long while, neither of them moved. No introduction, no teaching, just stillness. Then the monk lifted a small twig and placed it gently in front of Kai. Not in his hand, just on the ground. Kai looked at it, then at the monk, confused. The monk pointed to the stone Kai still clutched and asked one question, softly. "Why carry what you won't even name?" Then he stood and walked away, leaving the twig behind. Kai stared at the stone in his hand, and for the first time, it felt heavier than before. That afternoon, Kai returned to the courtyard. The twig was still there, the stone still in his hand. The monk was sweeping fallen leaves, his movements slow, deliberate, like each motion had meaning. He didn't speak. He simply glanced at Kai, then back at the path. Kai stood there, unsure. Then, silently, he began to walk the perimeter of the courtyard, stone in one hand, twig in the other. Each step became a question, each breath a memory. The twig, light and fragile, shifted in his fingers with the wind. The stone, solid and unyielding, weighed his palm. He walked for hours, no instruction, just presence. Until something shifted. At one point, a gust blew the twig from his hand. It floated away, gone. He reached out for it instinctively, but then stopped. Watched it fall, and in that pause, something inside him released. He looked at the stone, then at his own fist. Why was he still holding it? Kai stood at the edge of the courtyard, the stone still in his hand. Its surface, once cool, had warmed with his grip. It wasn't just a stone anymore. It had become a symbol of every resentment he buried, every fear he masked with confidence, every moment he couldn't forgive. He looked at it, really looked, and for the first time, he didn't see strength in holding it. He saw exhaustion. The monk watched from a distance, saying nothing, just being. Kai stepped toward the old garden wall. Slowly, he placed the stone atop a flat rock. Not with drama, not like a sacrifice, just gently. He stepped back. The stone stayed, and yet something within him felt lighter. He didn't walk away immediately. He stood there, hands empty, breath full, and in that stillness he understood. Letting go wasn't about loss. It was about making space. Space for peace, for clarity, for life, and maybe, for the first time, for himself. That night, the wind moved through the monastery like a whisper. Kai lay awake on the thin mat, but for the first time, his restlessness wasn't resistance, it was awareness. A deep quiet had replaced the noise inside him. He realized he hadn't changed. Not in the way he once imagined. There was no epiphany, no sudden awakening, just a stillness, a softness that hadn't been there before. He didn't miss the stone. He didn't long for the stories it carried. He didn't need to label his pain or analyze his past. He had stopped asking, why did it happen? And instead began asking, what can I live without? There was freedom in that question, not because it offered control, but because it didn't need it. As he listened to the night breathe through the pine trees, Kai smiled, not with joy, but with understanding. He had let go of something, but more importantly, he had allowed space for something else to arrive. Kai left the monastery before sunrise. No one said goodbye. No gate closed behind him. Just the same forest path, the same cool mist on his face, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't walking away from answers. He was walking away from the need for them. The mountain didn't offer him clarity in the form he expected. It didn't tell him who to become, what to do next, or how to fix his life. It simply gave him silence, space. And in that space, he had finally laid down what he had carried far too long. Not because he solved it, but because he didn't need to solve it anymore. Some stories don't end with resolution. They end with release. Kai didn't feel lighter because life got easier. He felt lighter because he stopped holding so tightly. And sometimes, that's enough. What if the life you're meant to live is waiting, just on the other side of what you're afraid to let go of?